Hello and welcome to WION World Order. We believe dialogue is the first step towards constructive change, and we've created a new platform to talk about issues that are important in the world, urgent issues, to bring in constructive change. This is the second edition of WION World Order, and today's theme is G20 Spotlight Osaka. The 14th G20 summit is going to be held in Japan, and we're here to set the agenda, talk about the challenges and the opportunities. And we have with us our dialogue partners, 3 serving ambassadors in 1 newsroom. Welcome to all of you. Let me introduce you. Taking diplomacy out of closed doors, we have Walter J. Lindner, Ambassador of Germany. He's a diplomat, musician, someone who's long been associated with India. We have Andre Arjona Correa do Lago, Ambassador of Brazil, a seasoned diplomat, also a prolific author. And Mr. Daniel Chuburu, he is Ambassador of Argentina, a career diplomat who has also worked extensively on marine ecology, I believe. Welcome to all of you. Let's begin with the opening remarks. G20 summit in Osaka, the 14th summit, begins tomorrow. What do you expect? What are your expectations? What do you think will be the stumbling blocks, if any?
Well, first of all, I think the Japanese have done a great job in preparing this summit. All of us who have prepared the summit know how much work this is. It's not only the work as a summit as such, but you have a lot of meetings beforehand and afterwards. So I think they have done a great work. Now, I think in a world of a globalized world where the topics are more and more complicated, the citizens out there, they don't know, who is doing what and what solutions can be brought up. No country in this planet can do things by themselves. No one. We need a cooperation. We need an international cooperation. We need a rules-based international construct where we can discuss. Now we can discuss in the United Nations. That's good, but of course this is something which is then a process which is ongoing. But we need some actual, some fora where we can discuss things among those who are really acting in the forefront. Now we have the G7, for example, which is the leading nations of industrialized countries. But I think to have a forum, a platform of G20, of developing countries and developed countries, is just very important, because there you can talk about not only the financial and the trade issues, but also about all those global issues which I mentioned, which need a solution urgently, like climate change, like trade issues, like artificial intelligence, like pollution, all the things, terrorism, all the things have to be discussed. And even though there might not be decisive decisions which are binding, but the fact that you have a forum where you can discuss this on the sidelines and in the conference is just important. So I think it's a very timely conference, and I hope we have a consensus outcome.
Ambassador, your thoughts?
Well, I'm going to start also praising Japan. I was ambassador to Japan before coming to India, and I recognize very much the focus, the seriousness, and the objectiveness of Japan in preparing this G20. And I totally agree that the G20 represents a very interesting group of countries. And as you know, Brazil and India have been working very hard to have their voice more heard in the international arena. We believe we need to have a greater standing in many of the great organizations that we already have. Obviously the UN, by the way, Germany and Brazil and India are together in the G4 and Japan. But also in the trade issues. We have organizations, we want to strengthen WTO, but we know that we are in a transition moment. This is a moment in which many people are perplexed. And I think we have to explain more to the public. We have to make the public understand which are the new challenges, which are the new threats, and which are also the new opportunities that getting together can make us discover and develop.
Right. Ambassador Chuburu.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think that I will concur with my colleagues in praising Japan, but not only for the organization of the meeting. I think that the job that they have done, and it's quite important, is what they've done with the agenda of the meeting. And they have been able to keep on moving the agenda from meetings that come Germany 2 years ago, Argentina 1 year ago. So this continuation of the agenda that we have been able to put forward during the last years, I believe it's a great job that they have done. Ambassador Lindner was saying, and I completely agree with him, this is a platform in which not only we can see for the governance and the balance of the macroeconomic situation in the world, but I think it gives us a great opportunity to tackle global issues. Global issues in an era of globalization require global responses. And I think that this is the appropriate forum where to do them.
Right. As the name suggests, G20 is a group of 20. Then we have 8 invited countries, 9 organizations like the UN, IMF, World Bank, and so on. And all the issues that you just mentioned. That's an awful lot. Has G20 then become unwieldy?
You know, the basic idea was, before that you had the G7. G7 were the 7 most industrialized countries in the world. And when the Asian financial crisis came up in the end of the 90s, we thought, or leaders thought, it's not enough to discuss this among the 7. So there were ideas by Bill Clinton then and others of a G22 or a G34 or something, experimenting on how many should we include. But then you have, if you have too many, then you go already the way down of a United Nations, and then you have a 40, 50 member group. If you do too little, too less, the number is small, then many countries would feel excluded. So what's the criteria? So they left it intentionally open. So it is now a 20 group, 19 states and 1 European Union, and they have some invited guests, which are sometimes permanent guests. Just to highlight that this is a moving body, but I think it's a good idea to have more or less around 20, because otherwise it's getting out of hands and the discussions take too long and we have too much the usual things. We as European Unions, we have 28 countries, and we know this how this is to discuss with 28 countries things. It takes a while, and on a global scale where you have different mentalities and different languages, whatever, it takes even longer. So I think 20 is a good number. Whether it's one day or 22 or 18, I don't know. But I think the idea is right.
Right. For a layperson, when we look at all these groupings, and today there was a newspaper article in India which talked about the alphabet soup. There's SAARC, there's BIMSTEC, there's G20, there's a lot of them, and they're seen mostly as talking shops. And most member countries are accused of then not walking the talk. Is it the wrong perception, or is action really missing, and why is it missing?
No, I think it's there is a dimension that maybe is close to that description. But I think that we have to admit, and this is quite difficult, to admit that there is a logic in the negotiations in all of these groups. But what I think we have to improve, including as diplomats, is the communication of this logic and the communication of this dynamic that happens in those groups. And I believe that's what we have to improve. The truth is that, as many times in diplomacy, what is more important is what you have avoided, not what you have achieved. And avoiding things is something that is extremely important in diplomacy, but it's not at all attractive for the media, it's not attractive for the public. And so to achieve a balance in a meeting like that is something that requires lots of meetings, lots of discussions, lots of papers, lots of efforts. And I think that we have not been able to show how much work and how much important things have been achieved through avoiding crisis, for instance. In a meeting like that, you have to avoid that some things become a crisis. So you have to deal with them in a way that they don't become a crisis. So I think that all these meetings continue because they have a logic and they have a reason to be. But I think we need to improve enormously the way we communicate what these meetings do.
Right. The primary mandate of the G20, as I understand, was to prevent future international financial crises. But now we're talking about everything from terror to cleaning oceans. So have we spread ourselves too thin here?
Well, it's logic that if you're going to have 20 leaders getting together once a year, the agenda will need to grow, because you have to have an holistic approach to what goes on. And it's not only the financial crisis, it's not isolated from some other problems that you have. So necessarily it comes to a point in which you have to see some other issues. And concerning the agenda, I think that there are two ways of looking at the agenda. One is the work, and that was what Andre was saying, the way the ministers and all the preparations are taking place, and some issues are discussed at that level. And then the main importance of having G20 is that you have the opportunity of having the leaders themselves debating issues that are of interest of the leaders. So mostly what you see in the statement of the G20 is the work that has been prepared during the year. But then you have the possibility of having the meetings of the leaders themselves and talking of the issues that are of importance at that point in time more than the rest of the agenda. Let me specify one issue now, which is the trade situation.
Yes.
And in the trade situation now you have the possibilities of having together and meeting in the sidelines US, China, India, all the countries that are the faces of this trade war. So if you want to talk about trade and you want to avoid protectionism, it's a good opportunity to have the leaders themselves involved in that discussion and what happens in the sidelines of the meetings. So it's very good as a prevention of any possible crisis that is arising to have this kind of meetings.
Is it true that more work gets done on the sidelines than the actual summit?
Yes, it does. That's what makes those meetings a bit doubtful for many people out there, because they think, oh, what's happening there? A recent poll in Germany showed that people are in favor of this G20 summit, but they have no idea what's really happening there. Who is talking with whom? What is pre-organized? Whatever. But it is true. That's the gist of diplomacy. That things are discussed at the sidelines. But I think, as Andre said, we have to make sure that this is more transparent, and there are press conferences afterwards. Okay, and there's a resume and there is a declaration. That's true, but it should be more open, and a program like this one is exactly the right thing to do, to see that this is not something a clandestine thing. It's something where world leaders come together and take their responsibility. That's what they have, because they are the world leaders, and they have to see that they find solutions for this. And if they don't find solutions, then the people out there know, well, there are few who are against some things. Yeah. So in the end, we might have, hopefully, a lot of consensus, but there might be some decisions or recommendations where we have a 19-1 outcome.
It's interesting you say this as a diplomat, because as I understand diplomacy as an outsider, is that you always leave some room for maneuvering, and what happens behind closed doors happens behind closed doors. You're saying that they should be held accountable for the decisions they take and for the stance they take?
Well, yes and no. I think it's still important that you have these discussions. You need some room to move for compromises. That's true. But also, you always have to think that these decisions are not in the space out there. Mm-hmm. They are relevant for 7.5 billion people on this planet. So at some point, leaders have to be responsible for the decisions.
Absolutely. Ambassador here mentioned trade, and G20 has been credited with helping avert a shift to protectionism post the 2008 financial crisis. And now we're grappling with protectionism again. Do you believe that this group, with the changed leadership of member countries, can achieve what it did a decade ago?
Well, I think that that's the objective. I think that what we see in this meeting is an open discussion about protectionism in a moment in which some people are calling for more protectionism. So when you see all these leaders together, and they are all from important countries since it's the G20, what you see is that they have a very important weight on the world economy. And I think if you hear what they say, it's very interesting to see that very similar countries can have completely different problems. And this is the opportunity in which you have to understand the other. And in the case of trade, we have seen now these issues here in India between US and India, or the issues between Brazil and other countries. We have to discuss this very openly, because I am sure that at least the three countries that are here, we are completely convinced that protectionism is not going to help. We have to strengthen WTO, we have to have a stronger dialogue, but we have to make sure that protectionism is avoided.
Right, and you've said something very important. It's important to understand the other. We know that there are bilateral problems between member countries, and we know that some leaders are more outspoken than others, and some presidents tweet. So how do such public pronouncements impact the background work that has been done for months behind closed doors?
Well, that's why I told you, I think that it's these two different levels of answers that you get in a communique are coming exactly from that, from the work that has been done previously, and then you add things that might come from the leaders themselves. And of course, the sidelines help for those bilateral problems, because you have the guys over there. So I believe that I do agree with both my colleagues that you have to have more transparency, that you have to have more communication. But in fact, what you have to have are actions coming from the countries that are the ones that reflect the agreements. Because the G20 is not an implementation body itself. So what you have to see afterwards is that what is decided at the level of the leaders in the G20 come to a reality through the actions that are taken in the different organizations. And you ask about trade. Trade is very important, and even in this time in which there is all this discussion about protectionism, the trade wars and all that, in the whole preparation of Japan, you can find that there are a lot of movements in a positive direction towards an open and free trade world economy, in which you have references to the WTO and the needs that you have to modify its functioning. There is a specific declaration that talks about protectionism in the field of agriculture. This has not been possible in many years, and then it's becoming a possibility. You have the mentioning of subsidies in fisheries, which is another very important issue. You have the need to strengthen the subsidies in industrial, to strengthen norms in the industrial goods. So there are a lot of things that you'll see in this process that are exactly what we expect, and that we congratulate Japan from what they have been doing in this preparation, because they have been able to move the whole thing, although there is this tension in the trade arena.